Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Matt Bailey. I'll be your host for today's session from developer friction to business velocity, the DevEx and platform engineering playbook. Thank you for joining us. We've got a strong audience here, a strong panel here of technology and engineering leaders. So we'll keep this practical, and strategic. Um, so here's how we'll run today. First, I'll set the scene for why developer experience and platform engineering have become board level concerns at this point, and then we'll move into the discussion with various segments with our panel. The first will be the business case for developer experience, and second, how organizations move from tool chaos to a strategic internal platform. And then I'll close with perhaps a preview of the North Star white paper, the North Star, it's not called that, the DevEx white paper, and how to get early access. Joining me today are Jason Spriggs, Philip Papp, and Paul Kavanagh. And I haven't missed anyone. So let's start with the bigger picture of why this conversation matters now. So if you look across engineering leadership today, the pressure is coming from every direction. Teams are being asked to ship faster, improve resilience, adopt AI, assisted ways of working, reducing waste, and maintaining security compliance all at the same time. Most organizations are dealing with increasing complexity across all of their tooling, delivery pipelines, and cloud estates and developer workflows. So developer experience is no longer just an engineering quality of life issue, it's become a real business performance issue. If developers spend too much time fighting systems and chasing access, it becomes too fragmented and resolving the same operational problems over and over again. The business pays for that in slower delivery. So, with that framing in mind, let's move on to our first topic, the business case for developer experience. So, let's speak to Jason on this one. You go first and tell us what you think.
Yeah, so I think some of the business case, the fundamentals for why developer experience is really at the crux of the beginning of when anyone gets onboarded at an organization. And it really comes to show how quickly can someone get from being a completely new hire up through having their first commit, not only in production or like in the code base, but also all the way out to production. That goes to show a wide variety of various pieces of the overall life cycle. How quickly can you get a computer? How quickly can you get your IDE set up? How much, how many intricacies are there in your existing code base, and how much friction is there in understanding all the various interdependencies? Um, Getting into all the various tools that you might need, having visibility into being able to see your code going through its process, and then actually getting on into production. So that time to first developer commit in production is, in my opinion, one of the key pieces there. As a part of that, I think that sort of helps write the business case, because if that process takes weeks, maybe even a month, more, then that speaks volumes to how quickly people are able to actually meaningfully contribute, because there are plenty of various road bumps in any organization that will need to be addressed as a part of that rollout. So the business case there is fairly straightforward, is that if you are able to get to be able to iterate earlier, then that allows your developers to be more agile and contribute faster. So that's sort of what I see pretty well across the board there. Um, yeah.
That's interesting around the developer first time to first commit. Is that something that any of you have seen being measured yet?
I often am not seeing that for net new developers, but I think it becomes very obvious um, when people are joining an organization, is that if they're able to commit and have something in production on day one, that's huge in showing people how how agile the organization is and how much they actually care about you being able to sit down and be able to actually contribute meaningfully. I think it's a red flag in many organizations if you have a new hire that comes in and they're not able to do something as straightforward as maybe make a text change in a code base
Yeah.
within
And just building on what
ideally very quickly. Yeah.
just building on what Jason's saying, that chain all the way from I guess hire to provisioning to giving people the right accounts, right access to the tools, and so on. In lots of organizations, that takes certainly a number of days, if not weeks. And in some examples, organizations have been struggling to get it down from months, would you believe, all the way down to days. So organizations should be measuring time to first commit. And I've seen some organizations go from 80 days, 60 days, down to 4 or 5 by relentless automation of the onboarding processes and so on. And sometimes people equate developer experience with making developers happy. And if you could do it well, that's a byproduct. What it's all about is actually removing friction from the job of software engineering. And that's Jason's point, includes new hires. So how can we give them the right tools, the right environment, and the right capabilities to start cutting code, ideally, as you said, on day one, but if not, very, very quickly. And people are expensive to hire. And the economics about software engineering, I'd argue it's expensive. AI is changing some of that, but you're now going to spend what you were perhaps paying on salaried staff actually for AI agents. So there's different sets of costs there, but it's really trying to shorten that period from ideation through, as Jason said, solutions into production and put them into the hands of your consumers, your stakeholders. So that business case is pretty rational, pretty logical, and you can identify various parts of that, both from a friction perspective and the cost of delay, but also in terms of hiring, reduced churn, greater retention, and greater engagement as well from your developer staff.
And
yes, go ahead, Phil.
To Jason and Paul's point, there's that overhead and time involved of getting a new starter up to speed and to get their first commit. But there's a lot of overhead also involved in all of the other teams that support the onboarding, right? You may have a manager that's involved. You may have team members that are involved. You may have HR and so on that's involved. That's a lot of time that doesn't get calculated into the onboarding process a lot of the times. And the developer experience isn't just getting the developer up to speed, but it's making it so that it's more automated, more self-service, and they don't need to reach out to as many people. So having things like software catalogs in place, automated processes for getting your development environment set up, good documentation, all of those things play a crucial role as well in ensuring that the developer can get up to speed, but they can do it in a more self-sufficient manner so you're not tying down other engineering time.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Paul, just one follow-up question there. You're obviously in and around many organizations that may be experiencing these problems. What or where do most organizations underestimate the investment that is required for this? Is it the tooling, the operating model, the platform team? Or
it's a really good question. The answer is all of the above. But to Philip's point, if you've got clarity about your processes, particularly onboarding, the approvals and provisioning of equipment, be that physical devices, virtual devices, working environments, tools, licenses, accounts, and so on. So if you're lucky enough to already have a singular process to do that, you're in a really good place, because then you can relentlessly automate to make it self-service. And yes, a manager may or may not need to actually approve something, but ideally the answer is, well, I'm hiring someone, let's say, who needs the same roles, entitlement, and access as Philip. Well, I should be using Philip's persona as a model and say, I've got a new joiner. To Jason's point, it could be someone joining a project, someone transferring teams, or it could be a new hire. Well, fine, I need a new persona for this individual, whatever their name is. and I'm going to model them on Philip. If you've achieved that automation, and in regulated organizations, often there's approvals, there's audit, and so on. That's not an excuse for doing things slowly. Automation will help you with the approval process. It will help you with the provisioning. It will also help you, and I guess rather like as individuals of online shopping like Amazon, it tells you when you've ordered something. It tells you when you paid for something. It tells you when something's been provisioned, and ultimately, hopefully, something pops in through your letterbox the following day, and it tells you it's been delivered. So that communication is really important. But you can only do that if you understand there's clarity about the process. In some ways, you've instrumented the process and you are relentless in terms of automating that to improve the experience. And a lot of developer experience is really just about reducing waste. There's obviously various forms of waste from a lean perspective, and it's just that focus. So if you've got multiple processes, please streamline them to as few as you possibly can. Understand where the weight states are, and understand where the opportunities for automation sit, because they will pay dividends hugely.
Thank you very much, Paul. So yeah, the case for DevEx is not just happier engineers, which, you know, when DevEx was, certainly when I first heard around around DevEx and the initiatives around DevEx, it was, okay, we want our engineers to be happier, which is, you know, absolutely true, but there is better business performance, better retention of engineers, and much better execution as well, which is fantastic. And brings us neatly onto our next question. If the problem is friction and complexity, what does the operating model actually look like that fixes this? So, Phil, we'll go with you first for this one.
Yeah, I think in a lot of cases, there's a lot of tool sprawl in organizations. Developers waste a lot of time, whether it be going through different tooling. There's a lot of knowledge silos that get created within an organization. All of those things can create friction and difficulties. So being able to tackle those in your developer experience can really help make your developers' lives easier. Like you said, happiness is kind of a hard thing to measure, but you can measure how things improve in terms of streamlining and throughput and stuff like that, and especially retention, right? If people are staying, then they're enjoying the way things are working. So being able to tackle those is key. And as Paul mentioned, when you go through and you look at your processes, you look at your tooling, you're going to identify those points where you have 3 tools doing the same thing, developers going through 3 different tools to try and get something done, and you can work on consolidating that to streamline everything.
Excellent. Thank you, Phil. Paul?
I think for me, exactly what Phil said for a start. I think also it's a nice opportunity. Again, if you're able to reduce the processes, you're able to automate those, you've instrumented them, you know how work is flowing. And by work, I mean either the output from software engineering, moving from ideation, creating software, validating it in a transparent, well-governed way and pushing it into production, or actually just simply onboarding a new hire. If you've got those processes, that's great. Where it's quite interesting is it kind of moves then the conversation on from developer experience into what I view as a bit of an accelerant, which is platform engineering, which is how can I continue to automate and reduce the overhead and burden for novelty. So the standardized kind of thing. So we'll often hear, say, cloud teams in particular, we'll talk about landing zones. This is the way, here's the information you need to provide to get an account. Here's basically some core infrastructure of a certain size that gets stood up for both testing, UAT, and production. So platform engineering for me is a complement to developer experience, and it nicely takes away some of the toil and waste. And Philip did a really good job of talking about tool sprawl and having to context switch that cognitive load and the effort of someone pivoting from one tool to another, or in some ways being interrupted for meetings. We know as individuals and as developers, we like to keep meetings to a minimum, and we like well-run ceremonies. We like to keep things so they're focused. So we have time for the more enjoyable, the creative pieces. So how, again, do we use platform engineering and other approaches really to reduce toil as well as waste, and thus giving people the opportunity to spend more time on the things they enjoy, which is taking business problems, solving them creatively, and making sure that, if you like, what flows through to production, again, is well documented, well understood, well reviewed in various dimensions, but effectively it's got to be efficient and effective as well. So flow is all the way through the processes there as well. And platform engineering, again, is a key enabler in my view.
And what's
I think
nice, one of the things I would say that's also really nice is, as a part of moving towards a platform engineering model that sort of has your IDP, your service catalog, your consistent processes, your pipelines that are standardized across your organization, is that it turns all of your various deployments, other processes that require code to go out into production, it makes it much easier for those to be understood by everyone, and allows for all of your various compliance, security, other sort of needs that must happen surrounding your processes. They all sort of are integrated in that same thing, which means that you don't have each team working in its own process, and oh, I need to go zip up my code and send it off to my secure my static code analysis tool. That's just part of the process, and it's not something that requires a lot of institutional knowledge. And I think that's something that is often overlooked, is it's this one person has been doing this job for some number of years, and no one realized that it was mission critical until it's too in a bad spot. So, no, sorry, Phil.
I was going to add that we hear a lot about people talking about shifting left, shifting more things towards the developers, and in a lot of cases that does help the developers get a better understanding of the upper parts of the structure. However, one thing that doesn't get talked about a lot, and something that platform engineering really helps, is also shifting down. So taking the stuff that platform engineers do, that DevOps does, whether it comes to spinning up environments, building in those compliance security templates into the code bases, and bringing that into a self-service model. So the developers can go self-serve. They don't need to spend a ton of time opening tickets, following up documentation. All that stuff's right there for them. And they can spend time doing what they enjoy, which is developing, instead of running around and doing all the process stuff.
And if I can just quickly add on to the points that Jason and Philip have made, when it comes to sort of governance, risk, and compliance. So again, platform engineering teams can really help with that. So provide a level of abstraction to make sure that things are being done. So there are guardrails running. And the key thing, particularly for larger organizations or those working in sensitive, regulated areas in particular, is that that's transparent and it's done in band. It's not done right at the end of the process. It happens on each and every single, or it can happen on each and every single build. So I've been recently working with a large stock exchange, and they took the view that any commit to a protected branch had to go through the mandatory set of checks. If you are making just code changes locally, you were invited to do it, but you didn't have to. But as soon as you want to get anywhere near the main code base, you had to do it, really to give the individual developer early sight and early sign of anything that wasn't perhaps quite right, but also to demonstrate to not only their internal stakeholders, but their external stakeholders and regulators as well, that process, their SDLC, was really well. It was transparent. It was well documented. It was well governed, well enforced, but with an in-band, clear audit trail to make sure that evidence was preserved. Because I've certainly sat in audits where people say, "Can you tell me what happened 2 months ago?" So you're going to comb through audit logs in a variety of different places, trying to reconstruct those breadcrumbs. So having a clear SDLC, putting those governance not necessarily stage gates, but certainly those transparent guardrails and automations around that. For okay, what happened? What were the policies and checks? What was the outcome of those checks? And have I got that evidence to hand? And you could do that on every single commit. You could do that on a variety of different bases. But that reduces so much time and effort later on and makes people more comfortable, particularly leadership and particularly C-suite, who have to manage a myriad of different types of risks, that the processes are well measured, well governed, transparent, and well audited, and secure as well.
Thanks, Paul. And just to force a summary out of you there, like in your experience, what's a realistic improvement timeline, and what tends to derail organizations before they actually start seeing results?
If you're asking me how much effort you put in to actually build some of those guardrails, the answer is days. In terms of the instrumentation and in terms of collecting the evidence with the right tooling, again, you can implement that in, I'll say days, but let's call it 1 or 2 weeks to make sure all parties are very comfortable. And you can start storing that data. So then you've got a verifiable source, and that gives you 2 things. One is it answers and reduces the burden of audit a lot because you're actually automatically collecting evidence. The other nice thing, and I'm not sure if it's a side effect or it's an intended consequence, but if you've got evidence of what happened and what should be there, you can check for drift in production because you've now understand how you got to the thing to be put into production. Okay, well, what's in production today? What's the version? Can I validate that against my developer pipeline, my SDLC? So you win on either side, both what's in production today, but also lowering the cost, lowering the friction really around audit governance and inspection later on.
Thank you very much for that. Extremely insightful. Phil, I've got a question here that just specifically for you. There's a big difference between an IDP, an internal development platform that becomes a strategic asset versus one that ends up as an internal tooling project that nobody ever adopts. In your experience, what separates these 2 outcomes? Because it's unclear to me whether it's just processes or whether it's the tool choice. Yeah.
I mean, tool choice obviously plays into it. I would say it plays a little bit less into it as the process and adoption that wraps around it. So having an IDP can give you a lot of those key pillars that a DevEx transformation looks to achieve, right? So we talked about a lot of that, like accelerating onboarding, making it easier for developers to do their job without a ton of overhead. The IDP can kind of become that central pillar where it gives you a service catalog so your developers can see all the dependencies between your different microservices. They can map out ownership. We can have things like templates set up that have a lot of those guardrails already in place, security parameters in place. We can have scorecards that can evaluate different repositories, whether they're meeting the compliance and guidelines that your organization sets out. And you're able to tie in all of the different tooling that you have, whether it be from CI/CD to monitoring to task management, all into one centralized location. But none of that helps unless people have strong processes built around it, right? So if you have that built into your onboarding process, when you're, let's say, for example, you have a new starter, they come in and they can go in there and they can see that, okay, their team owns all of these repositories. These different components in the repository linked to these different tooling, all of those things are in one location. It makes it very easy for users to self-serve and to be able to kind of accelerate their onboarding. And that's when we really see the DevEx transformation take off. So like with other tooling, the IDP is a very important part, but you still have to have the process around it to really accelerate your DevEx journey.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I have one other question that I've come up with here, and it's an open question for anyone. So, how does platform engineering intersect with your cloud strategy, your FinOps strategy? We've touched upon how it intersects with security and compliance requirements, but how does it intersect with all of this stuff in especially in regulated environments? I don't know if anyone wants to raise their hand to give me some insight into this.
So I would say, as far as how it goes into your cloud strategy, one of the core pillars I would say of any good developer experience platform is that it exposes things like infrastructure to the application developer to allow them to understand what sort of dependencies that might need to be provisioned would be put out there. So that might be going through and writing Terraform, OpenTofu, CloudFormation, whatever your flavor of the day is. But being able to expose that to your developers makes it much easier for them to understand and follow a set of guardrails, and similarly ensure that there's repeatability all the way through local development, all the way through production. That similarly then allows you to tack on additional things. Your FinOps, cloud cost monitoring, things that are along those lines would be there. You can implement policy as code, and that can be something that is done across the entire board when you're deploying those sorts of resources. And that sort of allows you to more easily put things forward. As far as FinOps, obviously, you can have cost estimations that are happening there. You can also then enforce things like if you're using infrastructure as code, you can then do like mandatory tagging of resources, ensuring that things are being tracked per application, per product line. And as you see these sort of patterns emerge, you can then also see, oh, okay, now that I have all of this data and it is well kept track of, we can then see, okay, maybe on this day, this application started using 3 times as many resources. Why is that? And then you can start drilling back when you have those sorts of exercises. And maybe it's, oh, we deployed across multiple availability zones, and maybe we didn't need that level of resiliency, or that was a business decision. We made that, and we're going in that direction. So it allows you to ask those questions and get insights much faster as a part of that.
If I can just add something onto that, really good description is for the majority of organizations, they are expending resource in pursuit of some goals. Cost, or time spent, cost of employees, cost of infrastructure are factors and facets of the cost of doing business. And obviously, you want to keep your cost of supply down, try and make sure you defend your profit margins, but you also want to grow a business. So to the point there around, well, did I need all those availability zones? Did I over provision infrastructure? FinOps is going to start to give you some of those elements there, but actually putting that in front of the software engineers to further inform future choices. So it is really important. And if you can do that and too many acronyms here, an integrated developer portal rather than integrated developer platform, all well and good, because that's bringing information and making that transparently available to everyone. But that also, I think, nicely plays with the post-production world. So how does my application run in production? What infrastructure is it running on? How healthy is that? So we've certainly seen good examples where, for example, service level agreements, SLOs, the cost of abandoned carts for online stores, you can start to calculate some of those commercial aspects, as well as the telemetry, recovering from downtime, error budgets, all those things as well. So there's quite a lot in the FinOps and instrumentation telemetry arena. I think nicely complements not only the development software engineering processes and deploys to production, but actually how you manage end-to-end costs and keep an eye on production as well.
Thank you very much. In the absence of a live audience Q&A, I have two more questions before we wrap up. So surprisingly little mention of the buzzword at the moment. So I will just throw it out there and ask, how does AI affect all of this? How does AI make this better, or does it not?
I'll have a bit of a stab if I can.
Sure.
All of the above and faster and more intensively. And that's both for cost, velocity. And I think one of I made an observation, I think, earlier on about the cost of people, the cost of software engineering. And obviously, as we get from or further away from a Gen AI prompt or suggestion, if you like, into more agentic workloads, which I think is incredibly exciting. But I'm still really a person in the middle of that loop process. We're certainly seeing people spending a lot of money on AI to sometimes questionable gain. But we then also see some people struggling with that ROI figure. So they'll fall onto what I call operational metrics, which is how many licenses have I bought, who's got a license, who's used a license in the last 30 days, and what's the level of activity. And that tells you something. But ultimately, whatever my metrics are for faster quality flow through my system, and actually what's my metric about the impact of that? So am I selling more product? Am I able to innovate faster? Those are some of the metrics that I think we should be more focused on necessarily than some of the operational metrics, and organizations that I think are starting in terms of velocity, innovation, market share, starting to creep away, who are the ones who've cracked that and understand where humans add the more creative elements and actually use AI for a lot of the friction removal, the toil type work. But I think it's a very nuanced question, and everything's changing every 4 or 5 months at a rate of knots. But so the above, but faster and more intensively.
As Paul
Bill?
mentioned, things in the AI space are changing very quickly. Here at Adaptavist, we have our own IDP product, venue.sh, which does have AI functionalities. So some of the ways that we find AI accelerating the developer experience, accelerating the IDP space is your IDP is already integrating with most of your tooling, right? It's integrating with your code, it's integrating with your CI/CD, it's integrating with your ticketing, it's integrating with basically everything. Feeding an AI directly in there, one way in the form of an assistant that has that contextual knowledge of all of the stuff within your environment can help accelerate onboarding, right? If a user comes in and has to ask a question, you now have an agent that is able to answer all of those things for you based on your own information, right? Based on your documentation, based on your repository, based on all of the knowledge that you've pulled in there, as well as helping existing people self-serve. The second part where we're able to use AI to accelerate is via MCP. Having your local AI assistant in your development environment, instead of it going and querying the general model that has, the generic knowledge of code, it's actually able to, via your IDP, query that information that you have internally, right? So it has the access to your internal documentation. It knows what that random billing service that was built, 3 years ago, what code base it uses, the documentations, the tickets that were created around it. It's contextually aware of all of those things. So when the answers come back to you, it's less trying to talk the AI assistant into helping you and is able to just give you the right answer right away. So that's kind of how I've seen AI accelerating things in the space.
I like the sound of that.
Yeah, I think what's really nice about that as well is that really then help with cloud cost, or sorry, AI adoption cost controls, because it's not having to go out and try and figure out your lay of the land every single time it's running a query, or based off of the context, which has its own drawdown on your spend. Being able to have a standardized way of understanding the rest of your tool chain and how your company's products work and how they all communicate together, certainly helps make that ROI easier, because it's just less that you're spending on things to begin with.
One quick point, if I can, again, just building on what the guys have said, is I think where we've seen success in some of our clients is where they are intentional around the use of AI. And what I mean by that is not necessarily, although some do, actually pick the AI tooling and the models to be used. It's to make sure that there are structured education programs. So we talk, and to basically build a level of knowledge, encourage people to share that knowledge from a baseline. Talk about the successes, talk about some of the failures as well, because we learn most when things don't go particularly well. But I think also then, and it comes back to some of the things we were saying about platform engineering, you can build it, but you need to make sure you're building the right things that solve real world problems for developers. So that's kind of number one. It's the same with AI, in my view. I think it's also to do with actually then rolling something out. So you can make the tools available, but how do you enable the tools? So you need to give them context from an engineering perspective. So you're solving the right problems using the right corpus and so on. But how do you get people comfortable using that? And what are the use cases that you have in mind? So again, being deliberate about rollout and adoption in any technology or digital transformation program is really important, not just the ones and the zeros for the engineering effort.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone, for your answers there. And I think just one final question, and I'll go around each of you if you could try and summarize in 60 seconds the answer to this question. We've all described developer experience as a competitive advantage, which I think is a strong claim, but it is definitely true. If we look to 3 years ahead, what does that gap look like between organizations that invest right now versus people that don't? Let's start with Phil on this one.
Yeah, I think one of the big places where you're going to see it is the companies that are investing in developer experience now are going to be able to retain good engineers. The good talent is going to stay because the processes are going to be easy to use. We know developers spend a lot of time not coding. There's statistics out there that they spend only 20% or so time actually hands-on keyboard working in code. And that's what developers enjoy doing. So being able to accelerate developer experience, allowing developers to do what they want more is going to help drive that retention. And those companies are going to see a return because they're going to have the right people stay at the company.
Thank you. Jason?
I think one of the big differentiators now, especially as the advent of AI and LLMs, is that so many companies are seeing their fields disrupted by completely greenfield projects that are entering the market. And I think either they have the luxury of not having technical debt. They also have the accelerators that are in place to be able to enable them to get to market faster. Other companies that are already in the field don't have that luxury. Every company has technical debt, and it's important that for them to stay relevant and to continue down the path that they are, to ensure that they have good developer experience for not only all the reasons that Phil mentioned, but simply because if they don't focus on that now, they will be behind and continue to be behind. And it's simply a force multiplier if you have good developer experience to be able to get to where you're trying to go and stay relevant. I think that's the big takeaway for this.
Excellent. And finally, Paul?
I think again, building on the excellent points that the guys have made, I think if you are deliberately or inadvertently choosing not to invest in developer experience, the future is going to be quite brutal, because you're going to be outpaced by threat of new entrants, as Jason said, but also competitors in your marketplace and in other marketplaces who are going to expand into your market. And if you don't have optimized processes, you don't have the automation, you don't have an engaged, productive workforce, human and augmented by agents, you're going to be in a pretty horrible place. So turning it on its head, if you are making those investments today, that's great. Good news is you're doing all the right things. I'd encourage you to be measuring that developer experience using some of the frameworks beyond Dora. Dora is great as a starting position, but think about the sentiment as well as the empiric side. Think about the experiential, and there's some really good tooling out in the marketplace to help you do some of that stuff. And you are in a fantastic position compared to everyone who's not making those investments, everyone who is actually in some ways putting their hands over their eyes and their ears because they're convinced that their current way of doing it is great. We all learn as we go, and the evolution at the moment is just so quick. Particularly, it's always been quick with technology, but it's particularly fast at the moment. And being blunt, it shows no sign of slowing down at all.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Paul. And on that note, I just want to come back to the white paper. It connects directly to these conversations that we've been having today. We've covered the strategic discussion around why developer experience matters, why platform engineering matters, and what separates organizations that treat this as a capability from those that treat it as more of a tooling exercise. The white paper goes a lot further. It explores the patterns, the operating principles, and the practical considerations behind building out engineering environments that do reduce friction and improve delivery outcomes. So if you found this discussion useful, I really encourage you to get access to that white paper. If you're registered to this as a webinar, you will receive a link to that afterwards. Otherwise, keep an eye out in descriptions or comments for links to it. And if you have any questions or want any support around any of these areas as well, do please reach out to us. So yeah, I suppose I will close this now. Just a couple of takeaways from me personally, as I haven't rambled on yet, so I'll get that out of the way. DevEx is no longer a side conversation. It sounds like it's tied directly to engineering productivity, surprise, surprise, retention, and general business execution. Secondly, platform engineering isn't about adding complexity for its own sake. It's about removing that friction, creating clear paths for teams, and making delivery repeatable, especially at scale. Organizations that treat this seriously now are more likely to create meaningful advantage over the next couple of years, especially as AI compliance pressures build up and delivery expectations continue to rise. So thank you very much, Paul, Jason, Phil, and everyone behind the scenes for setting up this webinar. Please do look out for the follow-up resources and early access to the white paper. I really hope today's session has been helpful and given you a practical view of where you should be focusing next. Thank you for your time, and gentlemen, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.